It started with a sound no one on that Buckhead street would ever forget. A sharp, tearing scream that sliced through the quiet Atlanta night like something breaking inside a human soul. 1 second the skyline was calm, lights glimmering across glass buildings. And the next, a body was falling from the 45th floor so fast people below couldn't even process what they were seeing. A valet froze mid-step, keys dangling from his hand. A couple dining on the patio of a nearby restaurant stood up in confusion, staring upward as shattered glass sparkled in the air like cold rain. When the body hit the pavement, the impact sent a wave of horror through the crowd, a sound so heavy it silenced everything else: cars, chatter, footsteps. Within minutes, sirens tore through the night. Police flooded the area, paramedics rushed forward, and on the sidewalk stood a barefoot pregnant woman with trembling hands and mascara running down her cheeks. Her voice shook as she whispered the same sentence over and over to the officer trying to calm her. He said I wasn't supposed to know. He said the baby wasn't mine to keep. And when Detective Jordan Price stepped onto the scene, steady and sharp-eyed, he knew instantly that this wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of a story dripping with secrets. But before that fall, before the blue lights, before the panic and the whispers, Tiana Brooks was just a 27-year-old woman trying to make her life make sense. 3 months earlier, she was in her small apartment in South Fulton, folding laundry after a long shift at the lounge, dreaming about a future that felt almost within reach but not quite. She grew up watching her mother work double shifts as a nurse, always tired, always pushing through, always reminding her, "Don't settle for a life that makes you feel small." Tiana didn't want to feel small. She had dreams of owning a beauty line, dreams of building something that belonged to her, dreams that stretched far beyond her bank account. Modeling gigs came and went. Hosting high-end events helped pay the bills, but not much else. She was tired of men who promised everything and delivered nothing. She wanted stability. Someone steady. Someone who saw her as more than a pretty face in a crowded room. And when she told these dreams to her best friend, Shanice, a blunt, fiercely loyal hairstylist who didn't let Tiana lie to herself, Shanice would just shake her head and say, "Girl, the right man will add peace to your life, not confusion. Just wait." Tiana wasn't waiting for a billionaire, though. She wasn't waiting for danger dressed as luxury either. But fate has a way of twisting ordinary nights into life-changing ones. 2 weeks after that conversation with Shanice, she flew to Miami to work a charity gala. One of those high-profile events where rich people sip champagne to raise money they won't miss. She wore a simple black dress, headset clipped in place, clipboard in hand, trying to manage sponsors, donors, and egos twice her size. The room glittered with gold accents and soft lighting. But the moment she saw the man who would shift her whole world, she didn't feel excitement, she felt curiosity. Abdulrahman Al-Hazar, known to most as Rahman, stood near the balcony overlooking the ocean. Older, polished, wealthy in a way that didn't need announcing. His eyes followed people with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Yet when he spoke to Tiana, it wasn't with arrogance. It was with a quiet, intentional interest that disarmed her. He noticed things others overlooked. How she kept her composure under pressure, how she spoke gently to stressed guests, how she made everything flow seamlessly. And when he said, "You carry yourself with grace," she felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. The next day, a bouquet of lilies arrived at her hotel with a handwritten note thanking her for her professionalism. She laughed, thinking it was harmless. But then he invited her to dinner. Not some loud celebrity spot, an intimate rooftop restaurant where the sky melted into the sea. He listened when she talked. He didn't flirt aggressively. He didn't brag. He asked about her dreams, her mother, her childhood, her work. He gave her his full attention, something rare and intoxicating. When she returned to Atlanta, he followed, claiming business meetings, sending car services, inviting her to quiet dinners where the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. She told Shanice she was seeing someone older, someone respectful. Shanice squinted and said, "Older men come with older secrets." But Tiana brushed it off. She felt chosen, protected, lifted. Ramon began renting high-rise condos for their weekends together. Different ones each time. It felt romantic then, like an adventure. Later she would understand it was strategy. He was keeping her untraceable. But in those early weeks, it felt like the life she had always wanted might finally be starting. And the danger she didn't yet see was already unfolding behind her. By the end of that first month, Ramon had woven himself into her life with such quiet precision that she barely noticed the shift. He brought her small gifts, paid for her mother's medication without telling her until later, and stocked her refrigerator with groceries he thought she liked. This wasn't love bombing, it was subtle, calculated generosity that made her feel cared for and slightly indebted at the same time. Their chemistry was undeniable. When he held her, she felt safe. When he spoke to her, she felt understood. But small things didn't add up. He always booked hotels under different names. He avoided calls during certain hours. He never talked about his life outside the country. He carried 2 phones. And when she asked simple questions, he redirected the conversation with a soft smile, saying, "Some things are better left for later." She didn't push, afraid of ruining something that felt like the best thing that had ever happened to her. She didn't realize she was stepping deeper into a life that required silence. She didn't realize she was becoming invisible in his world. And she didn't realize the first red flags were quietly waving right in front of her. Which leaves us with the question every viewer should ask themselves. When love feels too perfect, what hidden truth might be waiting underneath? If you're ready to see how deeply this story unravels, make sure you subscribe to True Crime Dossier and stay locked in for the next twist. Ramon's world didn't look like anything Tiana had ever stepped into before. When he walked into a room, the air shifted, not because he demanded attention, but because everything about him carried a quiet kind of authority. His accent was soft but firm, his tone calm but commanding. He spoke with the ease of someone who had traveled the world twice over and learned to hide the parts of himself he didn't want others to see. When he told her he was an investor based between Dubai, Atlanta, and Miami, she pictured boardrooms and glossy buildings, not the shadowy power he truly possessed. He moved differently. He thought differently. He lived in spaces protected by silent security teams and tinted windows. But what drew her in wasn't his wealth. It was how intentional he was. When she talked, he listened with his whole face. When she walked into a room, he stood up. When she said she was tired, he ran her a bath without asking. Men her age didn't move like that. They didn't study her the way he did. It felt like stepping into a warmer, gentler version of reality. One where she didn't have to carry the weight of every bill and every responsibility alone. Their connection deepened quickly, faster than Tiana knew how to manage. Ramon seemed to know exactly how to read her moods, when to be soft, when to be assertive, when to leave space for her dreams to breathe. He flew her to Miami one weekend just to see the sunset from a private dock, telling her, "You deserve moments that remind you life can be beautiful." He bought her mother a new recliner after learning she slept in pain at night. These gestures were small for a billionaire, but life-changing for her. And she felt humbled by how effortlessly he made difficult things seem solvable. But with every romantic gesture came a whisper of something off. Whenever she asked why he traveled suddenly, or why his assistant spoke to him with such nerves, he brushed it off. If she reached for the second phone he kept hidden, he changed the subject. And no matter how close they became, he never let her visit the same condo twice, always telling her he preferred fresh environments. She wanted to believe he was simply a private man, but Shanice kept warning her. Every man has secrets, but rich men have entire storage units full of them. Still, the fantasy was stronger than the doubts. Ramon opened doors for her everywhere they went. Luxury car rides, dinner reservations she never even had to ask for, balconies overlooking cities she'd only seen on TV. It all wrapped around her like a life she was meant to grow into. And the more time she spent with him, the more she felt like she was stepping into the kind of partnership she had prayed for. One night, as they sat on a rooftop in Midtown, a soft breeze moving through her hair, he told her, "I admire women who build themselves." You remind me of what strength really looks like." Her heart softened instantly. She didn't know how someone could speak like that and still hide entire pieces of his life behind locked doors. She didn't know the attention he gave her wasn't openness. It was strategy. And that the warmth she felt around him was part of a much colder design. The truth was, she was falling for a man who had already calculated exactly how close he needed her to be, and how invisible he needed her to remain. But something deeper began to bother her, something she couldn't fully explain. Ramon seemed to control the pacing of their relationship in ways that didn't feel obvious until she looked back. He always drove. He always handled the reservations. He always chose the locations. The apartments he used, luxurious but sparsely furnished, never felt lived in. When she asked if one of them was his real place, he brushed her off with the same gentle tone. "My business takes me everywhere. Home is wherever I need it to be." And though he introduced her to his chef, his driver, even one of his security men, he never introduced her to a single family member, colleague, or friend. She existed in a world crafted solely for her, but one with no windows into his real life. Still, the way he held her hand silenced her intuition. She told herself she was overthinking, that maybe this was what dating a billionaire felt like. She didn't realize that her isolation wasn't a side effect of his lifestyle. It was part of the perimeter he was building around her. By the time she understood the truth, she was in too deep to walk away without shattering something inside herself. Ramon's charm had wrapped around her so tightly that she ignored every warning sign because the comfort felt so rare, so soothing. And as their relationship strengthened, she didn't notice the thin layer of tension beneath every interaction. He kept the world from her not because she was special, but because she was temporary. And the deeper she fell, the darker the shadows around him became. Which leaves us staring at one simple, haunting question. How do you protect yourself from a man who knows exactly how to make you feel safe? If you're ready to uncover what happens next, subscribe to True Crime Dossier and stay with me. This story is only getting more dangerous from here. Tiana remembered the moment she learned she was pregnant with the kind of clarity that feels almost unreal, like the memory had been branded into her mind. She sat on the edge of her bathtub with the test shaking in her hand, her heart swelling with a mix of disbelief, joy, fear, and a deep sense of responsibility that made her chest tighten. She imagined the way her mother would smile once she found the courage to tell her. She imagined the kind of life she could give her child, maybe better than the one she had growing up, maybe filled with stability she never had. But when she told Ramon, expecting surprise or maybe awkward excitement, his entire face shifted in a way she couldn't read. He didn't smile, didn't touch her belly, didn't say her name the way he usually did. Instead, he inhaled slowly through his nose, eyes narrowing with something that felt like calculation instead of love. Then he said the sentence that turned her stomach cold. "We need to talk." And the warmth she once felt in his presence began to fade like someone dimming a light. After that moment, everything about him changed. He stopped looking at her the way he used to, stopped speaking to her with softness, and stopped showing up with thoughtful gestures. His tone became clipped, as though every word he spoke to her cost him something he didn't want to give. The distance wasn't loud, it was quiet, subtle, and empty. Days went by where his messages were short and emotionless, and when they did meet, he seemed distracted, watching her more than listening, as though she had suddenly become a problem he needed to solve. Then one evening he showed up at her apartment unannounced, tension wrapped around him like a second skin. He told her he'd made arrangements for her to move into a penthouse in Buckhead for the baby's safety. His voice was firm, leaving no room for discussion. She wanted to protest, to ask why they couldn't stay where they were, but his eyes held a kind of warning she had never seen before. And even though her instincts twisted uneasily, she convinced herself that maybe he was just scared too. The day he moved her into the 45th floor penthouse, she felt both stunned and unsettled. The place was breathtaking, marble floors polished like a mirror, glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling, the Atlanta skyline glittering beneath her like a bowl of scattered diamonds. She walked through the massive living room in disbelief, touching the smooth surfaces, noticing the expensive art pieces, the sleek kitchen appliances, the velvet furniture. Anyone else would have called it paradise. But something about it felt vacant, staged, too perfect. There was no key card for her, no spare keys, no access to the building without pre-approval. The doorman avoided eye contact when she tried to make small talk. Security cameras were angled directly at her hallway in a way that felt less like protection and more like surveillance. Every luxury seemed to come with an invisible chain attached. It didn't feel like she was moving into a home. It felt like she was being placed somewhere. Ramon began listing the rules, in a tone that didn't match the romantic man she had known. He told her no outside visitors were allowed. Not her mother, not her friends, not even delivery drivers. He said she couldn't leave the building without notifying him first because the baby must be protected at all times. He insisted she switch doctors so he could schedule her appointments. He said he would handle transportation from now on because he didn't want her stressed or overwhelmed. Every sentence sounded like concern, but the way he said them felt like he was tightening a grip around her life. She told herself not to overthink it, that maybe he was just being cautious, but deep down she felt the walls closing in. The luxury around her didn't feel comforting. It felt suffocating, like being trapped inside a golden cage where everything sparkled except her freedom. By the end of the first week, Ramon was fully in control of every part of her daily life. He changed her phone plan without asking, giving her a new device with better security. He decided which doctors she could trust and sent a sleek black car to take her to each appointment, driven by men who never spoke. He told her this was the safest place for her, that too many people in Atlanta knew her face, that he was protecting her from threats she didn't know about. And even though she wanted to believe him, a part of her felt like she was being slowly erased from her own life. She would stand in front of the huge windows at night, staring down at the city she no longer had access to, wondering when love had begun turning into control. She felt the shift inside herself, a creeping fear that something was terribly wrong, but she didn't yet know how deep the truth ran, or how far Ramon would go to keep her exactly where he wanted her. And even then, as she tried to convince herself she was safe, she felt a deeper question forming inside her. If this was love, why did she suddenly feel so alone? Tiana first met Yusuf on a Wednesday morning, though she would later say it felt less like an introduction and more like being evaluated. He knocked once before stepping into the penthouse, dressed in a dark suit that looked too formal for someone who claimed to be just assisting Mr. Ramon. He introduced himself politely, with a slight smile that never reached his eyes. His voice was calm, measured, almost gentle, yet something about it made her feel like every word he spoke was part of a script. He walked through the penthouse checking locks, windows, doors, and security systems as if inspecting a vault rather than a home. The entire time, he spoke about safety protocols, while glancing at her with unsettling curiosity. He said Ramon had sent him to ensure she had everything she needed, but she sensed immediately that he wasn't there to help her. He was there to monitor her. From that day forward, Yusuf appeared almost daily, always uninvited, always at unpredictable times. He'd show up with groceries she didn't request or updates she didn't ask for, moving through the penthouse like he owned the space. And each time he left, she felt more watched than cared for. Within days, the restrictions around her life tightened in ways she couldn't explain. Her phone, the new one Ramon had given her, began glitching whenever she tried to call her mother. The line would drop, or the call would fail before connecting. When she logged into her old email, the password suddenly no longer worked. Her old number, the one she'd had since high school, stopped receiving texts, then stopped functioning altogether. When she called customer service using the penthouse phone line, they told her the number had been permanently deactivated at the account holder's request. The account holder wasn't her. Her transportation options shrank too. The car service would only take her to 3 approved locations: a clinic she didn't choose, a market she never visited before, and a private lounge owned by one of Ramon's companies. Anytime she attempted to request a drop-off elsewhere, the driver would apologize, saying, "I'm not authorized to go there, ma'am." The entire world outside the penthouse seemed to be slipping through her fingers like sand she couldn't grasp. The first threatening message arrived late one night while she sat on the couch trying to distract herself with TV. Her phone vibrated with a number that had no contact name and no area code. When she opened the message, her heart froze. "You will disappear before you ever give birth." She stared at the words, her entire body tightening with fear. Minutes later, a second message appeared. "His wife knows." And before she could process that, a third followed. "He will take the baby." Her hands shook so violently she dropped the phone onto the floor. She told herself it had to be a mistake, a prank, someone trying to scare her. But deep down she knew it wasn't random. Someone knew exactly where she was and who she was carrying a child for. Someone had access. She reached for the landline to call Shanice, but the line kept ringing until a mechanical voice said the call could not be completed. The next morning, she tried going downstairs to meet Shanice outside, but security blocked her in the lobby, saying she wasn't allowed visitors without Mr. Ramon's approval. She went back upstairs with tears burning in her eyes, realizing slowly and painfully that she was sealed inside a world she no longer controlled. Over the next week, fear began creeping into every corner of her life, turning the penthouse from a luxury retreat into something resembling an elegant prison. At night, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door, even when she knew she was the only resident on the floor. Sometimes she woke to find the bedroom door slightly open, even though she remembered locking it before bed. Her laptop opened with tabs she didn't click. Her closet rearranged itself in small ways. Shirts folded differently, shoes placed in the wrong order. Every time she confronted Yusuf about it, he gave the same calm smile and said, "Maybe you're just stressed, ma'am. Pregnancy can do that." His voice was soothing, but his eyes told a different story. She didn't know who to trust anymore. She felt Ramon slipping away while his control over her life tightened. And she felt the walls closing in on her, inch by inch. She told herself to stay calm, to think clearly, but the fear inside her grew faster than she could contain it. Then one evening, while Ramon showered after returning from a week-long trip, Tiana noticed his tablet glowing on the nightstand. It wasn't locked. The screen showed a folder she had never seen before, one labeled with her own name. She approached it slowly, her breath catching in her throat, sensing that whatever lay inside would change everything she thought she knew. She tapped the screen once. The folder opened, and the moment she saw what was in it, her entire world tilted beneath her feet like the floor of the penthouse itself had shifted. She didn't scream, didn't speak. She simply stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. Because the truth she had been avoiding was now staring back at her. And it was worse than anything she had imagined. Tiana didn't breathe at first. She just stared at the screen, frozen, as the folder labeled with her name opened into a maze of files that had no business existing. The first document was an encrypted record titled Client Intake, TB04. She clicked another, then another, and her stomach dropped so hard she felt dizzy. Names of women scrolled across the tablet, each one labeled with codes, dates, countries, and final notes. Some names had red stamps, resolved. Others were marked relocated or closed. She opened a random file and saw scanned passports, medical documents, flight itineraries, clinic schedules, and wire transfers. None belonging to her, all belonging to women who looked eerily like her. When she opened a folder named Medical, her hand covered her mouth. There were termination records, abortion procedures performed under false identities, signed off in private overseas clinics. She clicked a folder named Surveillance Notes and saw pages describing behaviors, routines, emotional states, warnings, and recommended interventions. And beside each woman's name was a note describing when the relationship began and how it ended. Tiana's chest tightened as she realized she wasn't reading about strangers. She was reading about ghosts, women who were erased quietly, neatly, efficiently. Her pulse hammered as the truth cut deeper with every file she opened. She wasn't the first woman Ramon had charmed with attention and affection. She wasn't the first to be moved into a high-rise safe space. She wasn't the first to be isolated, monitored, controlled, and then quietly removed the moment her pregnancy became inconvenient. Her hand trembled as she opened a document titled TB04 Action Plan. Her name was at the top. Beneath it was a list of upcoming dates, scheduled doctor visits she never heard of, and something chilling labeled projected intervention deadline. Tiana didn't understand everything she read, but she understood enough. She was never meant to keep her baby. Her life was already mapped out by him, and her disappearance, however he planned to stage it, was already part of his timeline. She felt her throat close. Her legs weakened. Every moment of tenderness he'd shown her suddenly twisted into manipulation. She pressed her hands against her belly and whispered, "Not my baby. Not us. Not like this." The realization hit her with undeniable clarity. Ramon had done this before, and she was next in line. She moved quickly, driven by instinct rather than logic. She grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and shoved inside whatever she could. Ultrasound photos, a few changes of clothes, important papers, her wallet, and the phone she'd hidden weeks ago just in case something went wrong. Her breath came in sharp bursts as she double-checked the hallway camera outside her door. She waited until the red indicator blinked off, just long enough to slip into the corridor unnoticed. She pressed the elevator button over and over, praying it would arrive fast enough. When the doors finally slid open, she stepped forward, her heart pounding like it was trying to escape her chest. She imagined making it downstairs, catching a taxi, running into Shanice's arms, telling the police everything. She imagined freedom so vividly she could taste it. But the moment she stepped one foot inside the elevator, a hand touched her shoulder. Cold, firm, unmoving. She turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Yusuf stood behind her, expression unreadable, as though he'd been standing there long before she pressed the button. He didn't raise his voice or threaten her outright. He didn't need to. His calm stare said everything. "You are not to leave this floor without Mr. Ramon's approval." His tone was flat, almost gentle, but the message wrapped around her like iron. She felt her stomach twist as he took the duffel bag from her hand with smooth precision, as if taking contraband from a prisoner. He didn't shout, didn't touch her aggressively, and didn't explain himself. He simply stepped back, gesturing toward the penthouse with a slight tilt of his head. Her fight melted into dread. She knew pushing him, arguing, or trying to run would only bring consequences she wasn't prepared for. Slowly, painfully, she walked back into the penthouse with her heart splintering in her chest. Every step felt heavier, her future darker. When the door shut behind her, she leaned against the wall, tears spilling silently, realizing she was trapped not by accident but by design. But even as she wiped her face, another feeling rose beneath the fear, a quiet, fierce determination. She wasn't going to let anyone decide the fate of her child. Not Ramon. Not Yusuf. Not any of the silent watchers behind the cameras. She sat on the edge of the bed, breathing slow, trying to steady her racing thoughts. If the first attempt failed, she would try again. If they blocked her, she would find another route. If they watched her, she would wait for the moment they blinked. She had survived too much in her life to let this be where her story ended. Her hands shook, but her resolve hardened. The truth had shattered everything she believed about Ramon, but it had also awakened a strength she didn't know she carried. And now, as she stared out at the city far below her, she understood one thing with chilling clarity. She was living on borrowed time. When Ramon returned to the penthouse that night, he carried himself with a level of calm that made Tiana's skin crawl. He walked in with the same soft footsteps, the same faint scent of expensive cologne, the same quiet authority that once felt comforting but now felt sinister. He greeted her with a gentle, "Hello, Tiana," as if nothing had changed, as if her world hadn't just been ripped open by the files she'd seen. She stood frozen near the window, her breathing uneven, hands trembling behind her back. When he approached her, she stepped away, keeping distance between them. His eyebrows lifted slightly, as though her reaction surprised him. And then she let it spill. She told him she saw everything, The names of the other women, the settlements, the medical files, the erased pregnancies, the surveillance notes. Her voice cracked with anger, fear, and heartbreak. She asked him why he lied, why he hid the truth, why he treated her like she was disposable. For the first time since she had known him, Ramon's expression tightened, not with guilt but with irritation. He told her she was being hysterical, that she was overreacting, that she was misinformed about things she didn't understand. His dismissal ignited something raw inside her. She told him she wasn't stupid, that she knew exactly what she saw, and that she wanted to leave immediately. He stepped closer, his tone shifting from soothing to sharp, insisting she calm down. When she moved toward the hallway, he reached out and grabbed her wrist, not violently at first, but firmly enough to stop her in place. She yanked back, but his grip tightened as he tried to pull her closer. He kept saying her name as though he could control her panic with his voice, but she wasn't listening anymore. She was scared of him, scared for her baby, scared of everything she had been blind to. The tension snapped between them like a wire pulled too tight. She shoved him in panic, and he stumbled, cursing under his breath. He grabbed her again, harder this time. They both shouted, voices echoing off the marble walls. She tried to pull free. He tried to keep her from leaving. Fear twisted into desperation, and desperation twisted into a dangerous struggle neither of them could control. Their bodies crashed against the furniture, slipping on the polished floors as she fought to get away from him. His grip on her wrist burned. Her breath came in sharp gulps. He tried to hold her still, tried to silence her, but panic made her stronger than she had ever been. She pushed, twisted, clawed, her instincts screaming louder than any words could. His face tightened with frustration as he tried to restrain her, not realizing the force of his own movements. And in that chaos, two bodies battling fear, betrayal, and survival, Ramon lost his footing. It happened in seconds, but it felt like slow motion. His heels slipped against the edge of the rug. His shoulder hit the balcony door. His balance tilted backward, arms flailing for something to grab. Tiana gasped as he stumbled toward the open balcony. She reached forward, not to save him, but out of instinct, but her fingers brushed air. His eyes widened with shock more than fear. Then he fell. The night swallowed his scream. His body hurtled over the balcony rail, dropping from the 45th floor like a stone thrown into darkness. Tiana's own scream tore from her chest as she stumbled backward, clutching her stomach, her heart, everything inside her that felt like it was collapsing. She rushed to the balcony and looked down only long enough to see a blur of movement and a crowd forming far below. She stumbled away from the railing, shaking, sobbing, unable to process what had just happened. Her hands trembled violently as she tried to breathe, tried to think, tried to steady herself. The penthouse suddenly felt too bright, too quiet, too empty. Every sound echoed. Every breath stung. She had just watched her world fall, literally and figuratively, and she had no idea what would happen next. Her body felt weightless, her knees threatening to buckle as she backed away from the balcony door. The sound of pounding footsteps in the hallway barely registered before the penthouse door burst open. Police officers rushed inside, shouting commands she couldn't immediately understand. Flashlights cut through the room. Radios crackled with urgency. Someone grabbed her arm, trying to guide her to a chair, but her mind couldn't catch up to her body. She tried to speak, but no words came out, only sobs. Officers demanded to know what happened, voices overlapping in a blur. Blue lights from the street below flashed against the glass walls like warnings from another world. Her chest tightened as she felt all the fear she'd been holding inside finally break through. She sank to the floor, clutching her stomach as tears streamed down her face. She didn't know how to explain the truth, not yet. She didn't know what the police already knew. But she did know one thing. Whatever story was about to unfold, nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Detective Jordan Price sat across from Tiana in one of the penthouse's guest bedrooms, temporarily transformed into an interview space because she was in no condition to be transported. The officers had wrapped her in a blanket, but she still shook uncontrollably, Her cheeks streaked with tears she couldn't stop even if she tried. Price spoke softly, trying to ease her breathing, but each time she tried to recount what happened, her voice cracked, collapsing under the weight of shock and guilt. She kept saying she didn't mean for him to fall, that she tried to pull away, that she felt trapped. Price listened carefully, not rushing her, not interrupting. He'd seen victims break down before, but something about Tiana's tremors and the way she gripped her stomach told him this situation ran deeper than a domestic fight gone wrong. When officers brought in preliminary reports from the building's security system, Price immediately sensed something off. Several camera feeds were missing. Logs were incomplete. Door access records were wiped clean for the entire week leading up to the incident. Someone had tampered with the system, and not in a sloppy way, but with precision. He had the building's security team bring up the raw server data, and the inconsistencies became clearer. Entire clips were replaced with loops, footage showing empty hallways even when residents claimed they'd walked through them at those exact times. Elevator logs showed errors, as though someone had overridden access. Every digital trace that should have confirmed Ramon's movements looked scrubbed. Many wealthy residents hired private tech teams, but this level of tampering wasn't normal for a simple malfunction. The more Price dug in, the more the penthouse began to look less like a residence and more like a controlled environment tailored around one woman. Meanwhile, outside the glass walls, the world had already erupted in chaos. News alerts blazed across TV screens. Sheikh falls in Atlanta. The story went global in minutes. International reporters swarmed the building. Helicopters hovered overhead. Rumors spread like wildfire, some calling it an accident, others calling it murder. And before Price could speak to Ramon's associates, a team of Dubai attorneys had already flown in, demanding access, demanding statements, demanding to shape the narrative. Tiana watched helplessly from the living room couch as the media turned her into a spectacle. Headlines began framing her as unstable, emotional, a mistress losing control, painting her not as a victim but as a threat. News commentators questioned her intentions, her background, and her relationship with Ramon. Online comments accused her of trapping him, plotting against him, even blackmailing him. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly, trying not to crumble under the weight of strangers' judgment. But Detective Price saw through the noise. He recognized the signs of someone groomed, controlled, manipulated. As he walked through the penthouse, he noticed how everything inside looked curated and sterile, as though Tiana's presence was temporary, not welcomed. There were no family pictures of Ramon, no documents, no personal attachments. Only luxury items meant to impress but never reveal anything real. Price examined the bedroom, the locked closets, and the high-level security system patched into private networks. And he understood that no matter what the media said, this woman had not been living the life of a girlfriend. She had been living the life of someone managed. In the middle of all the noise, Price requested a psychological expert to join the investigation, not to evaluate Tiana's guilt, but to analyze her environment. They noted how isolated she had been, how carefully her social connections were severed, how her communication was controlled. The expert pointed out behavioral patterns consistent with coercive control and reproductive manipulation. They discussed how abusers with power often conceal their coercion behind luxury, making victims appear ungrateful, dramatic, or unstable when they attempt to escape. Price nodded silently, his suspicions strengthening. Everything about this penthouse, the cameras facing inward, the keyless access, the private clinics, the silent staff, suggested she had been monitored, not cared for. And the more he pieced together, the more the story presented itself for what it truly was, a pattern. A system. A cycle built around secrecy and power. As the building management turned over more records, Price uncovered even more irregularities. Unpaid internal invoices for special cleaning services, undocumented visitors arriving at odd hours, and encrypted communications sent between Ramon's staff and private international numbers. Meanwhile, Ramon's attorneys tried to shift the narrative, pressing Price to consider Tiana as the aggressor. floating the idea that she might have pushed him intentionally. But Price had seen too many domestic violence cases to fall for the facade of the powerful. He replayed Tiana's trembling voice in his mind, her confusion, her terror. When he looked into her eyes, he didn't see deception. He saw someone who had been lied to, cornered, and terrified long before Ramon ever fell. And despite the noise outside, despite the pressure from foreign officials, despite the fabricated headlines, Price knew there was more truth hidden in that penthouse than anyone wanted to admit. He just had to uncover enough to prove it. And fast. The official ruling came after weeks of interviews, digital forensics, and quiet battles behind closed doors. Detective Jordan Price pushed back against every attempt to distort the truth, presenting evidence of tampered security logs, missing footage, and a clear pattern of manipulation surrounding Tiana's life. When experts testified about coercive control and the psychological traps wealthy predators often use, the narrative finally shifted. The district attorney reviewed everything: Ramon's behavior, the environment of isolation, the struggle that neighbors had faintly heard, and the overwhelming signs of control. In the end, the conclusion was undeniable. Ramon's death was the result of an accident during a violent domestic struggle. Tiana acted in fear, not aggression. No charges would be filed. When the ruling was announced, Tiana didn't celebrate. She simply closed her eyes and exhaled a breath that had been trapped in her chest for months. But not everyone accepted the outcome. Yusuf vanished the moment investigators tried to locate him. And within hours of the ruling, the penthouse, once the scene of everything, was professionally wiped clean by Ramon's international team, leaving behind no trace of the life she lived there. It was as if she had never existed inside those walls. With nowhere else to go and exhaustion settling deep into her bones, Tiana moved back into her mother's small but familiar home in South Fulton. The creaky floors, the old family photos on the walls, and the scent of her mother's cooking wrapped around her like a blanket she didn't know she needed. Healing wasn't immediate. Nights were restless. Loud sounds made her jump. She'd wake up sweating, reliving the balcony, the fight, the fall. But her mother held her through every breakdown, whispering, "You survived what others didn't, baby." Slowly, Tiana began to piece herself back together. She attended therapy, trying to understand how she'd slipped so deep into a relationship that stripped her of everything: privacy, power, safety. She replayed every moment in her mind, realizing how each small decision led to a larger trap. And with every realization came a deeper commitment to never ignore her instincts again. She kept the ultrasound photos pinned beside her bed, reminders of the one reason she fought so hard to stay alive. As months passed, Tiana began preparing for motherhood, determined to raise her child with the kind of love and protection she never received in that penthouse. She bought baby clothes with soft colors, decorated a small nursery, and sat through birthing classes with her mother by her side. She moved quietly, intentionally, choosing peace over anything that resembled luxury. Every doctor's appointment was a reminder of how close she came to losing the life growing inside her. But each kick, each heartbeat, each tiny movement reinforced why she chose to fight. She spent evenings journaling, reflecting on her journey, writing letters to her unborn child about strength, danger, trust, and self-worth. In those quiet moments, she found clarity. She wasn't ashamed of surviving. She wasn't ashamed of fighting back. She wasn't ashamed of choosing her child over a man who never truly loved her. For the first time in years, she felt her identity forming again. Not as someone's girlfriend, someone's secret, someone's possession, but as herself. One afternoon, Detective Price visited her home for a final update. He sat at the kitchen table, hands folded, and his expression softer than she'd ever seen. He told her the case was officially closed. Then, with a deliberate pause, he shared something he'd uncovered, but waited until she was emotionally strong enough to hear. Ramon wasn't just controlling. He had a long history of similar relationships around the world. Women who disappeared quietly from his life under mysterious circumstances. Tiana wasn't the first woman he isolated. She wasn't the first woman he deceived. She wasn't the first woman he tried to control. But she was the first woman who survived long enough to expose the truth. Price told her he hoped she never blamed herself for falling for someone skilled at hiding darkness. She nodded, tears filling her eyes, but they were different tears, tears of relief, of understanding, of closure. Price stood, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder before saying, "Love should never cost you your freedom." It was a simple sentence, but it pierced straight into the heart of everything she had endured. That night, as Tiana stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching the soft glow of the lamp spill across the crib, she placed a hand on her belly and whispered a promise to her child. She promised to protect them from the kind of love that masks control. She promised to teach them the difference between affection and possession. She promised to raise them with honesty, choice, and freedom, values she had been denied until it was almost too late. When she looked out the window toward the city lights, she felt no fear, only strength. She had walked through a life-threatening storm and emerged not untouched, but unbroken. She understood now that luxury could blind you, affection could mislead you, and secrets could ruin you. But truth could save you. And as her story came full circle, she realized the final truth. Some secrets protect the powerful, but some secrets end them. If this story shook you, if it opened your eyes to how love, control, and danger can hide behind luxury and sweet words, then don't leave without supporting this channel. Click subscribe button now so you never miss the next true story that exposes the truth behind the masks people wear. Turn on notifications, share this video with someone who needs this reminder, and stay with us, because here at True Crime Dossier, every story is a lesson, every voice matters, and every warning could save a life.